Okay, chapter 5 is the chapter on language, and I'm going to do this in two parts and get through it relatively quickly. So, the beginning of the chapter starts out by describing the nature of language, and that refers to a number of different things. First of all, the symbolic nature of language has to do with the fact that the meaning of a word, the meaning of language can vary from person to person, and the chapter explores some of the reasons that that is the case. The idea that language is rule governed dictates that we have certain linguistic guidelines that we have to follow. And here you see many of them listed out: phonological rules, syntactic rules, semantic rules, and pragmatic rules. You can go to the text or simply read the slide to get to understand more of what that means. The nature of language in terms of subjectivity is best illustrated by Ogden and Richard's triangle of meaning. And you can see that it is only because of the user that they basically make the link between the digital symbol, which is the word, the language, and the object that it represents, that we, the persons, make these connections. And obviously that's going to vary from person to person based on a number of different variables. Second section in this chapter deals with language and worldview. And linguistic relativism, Benjamin Whorf and Edward Sapir came up with linguistic determinism first, which basically argued that the limits of your language are the limits of your world. And it was very black and white. Linguistic relativism simply loosened that a little bit and argued that the worldview of a culture is influenced or shaped and reflected by language. A little bit less black and white than linguistic determinism. Third section of this chapter deals with impact. And certainly the idea of naming and identity is critical. And you can find some interesting articles that talk about identity and self-concept as related to the name that you bear and the name of certain objects and certain things and certain entities and certain activities can determine a lot of the emotion felt toward those items. Affiliation has to do with how you can use your language to build community. And this idea of convergence, here you see the definition: adapting your speech style to match others. It's very interesting how people can be in a group, and even something subtle like an accent. Everybody around has a particular accent. It might be a minor stressing of a particular vowel, and all of a sudden somebody who does not naturally by nature, by upbringing, have that accent begins to exhibit some of that behavior. Divergence is when it's basically the opposite, and you stress your difference from the norm in terms of what else is going around you. Power. Oh my goodness, this is tremendous. I have a video I'm going to show you that will illustrate some of the power elements of language, but I strongly encourage you to consider your own language. Is your language, is it characterized by what is called powerless language? Things like hedges and, with the fillers and tag questions. Or do you use powerful speech? Your book gives you some clear delineations in terms of what is in the category of powerless and what is powerful. A couple of suggestions for you. Things like tag questions like, well, kinda, or what do you think? Or, well, yeah, I was going to do that if that's okay with you. Those are powerless. Of course, a lot of slang. If you say like a lot, if you say a lot, that's all considered powerless. Okay. Precision and vagueness. This is real clear in the book in terms of, you know what, I think I jumped up a little bit. I did. Back under the idea of impact of language, we need to talk about sexism and racism. And Some people are very, very, very sensitive to this. Other people really don't care. And so it's important to err on the side of caution and use language that cannot be construed as sexist. And so typically you want to say flight attendant instead of stewardess. You want to say my mail carrier rather than mailman, simply because that's considered to be less offensive. And certainly racist language that can include a lot of things like words that deal with uh, insulting terms that denigrate one particular group and a label and so on and so forth. Now, section 4, in terms of uses and abuses, here's where I want to talk about precision and vague. And there is what we call an abstraction ladder, and you'll see that here, that argues that oftentimes we might say something that's very general and that would be considered high up on the abstraction ladder versus something that's very specific. Look at the example. The best way to understand the abstraction ladder is simply by looking at an example, and then it becomes fairly straightforward. Okay, so why does that matter? Well, obviously, if you use a lot of abstractions, it's very easy to be misunderstood. And it's very easy to generalize. That generalization leads to a lot of stereotyping. And so the more precise you are, the better. So you really want to work on being specific. You want to reduce euphemisms, and you want to be as straightforward as you can without being harsh. And so your book gives you lots of examples of things to avoid and examples of abstract language or vague language and ways to improve that. And you can see some of that delineated here. These are all examples of what you want to avoid. Strongly recommend that you think carefully as you go through this section. Does any of this characterize you? And if so, is that something you want to change, and how can you go about changing it? Okay, so that's the end of this part of the PowerPoint. I'm going to record the second part shortly.